Dr. King was speaking in Washington about a dream to overcome the broken promises. On that day, years later, from Texas across to Florida up to Maryland, people of color couldn't use a single public toilet. Our money was counterfeited. People of black soldiers, my father's generation, would come to Europe to fight against Nazism, was facing it at home, and didn't have the same rights on military bases as Nazi POWs did in 1963. And yet somehow we chose to get better, not to get better, to go forward by the power of our hope and not be limited by our fears and by our cynicism. So August 28th, 1955 is one America. August 28th, 1963 is yet another America. August 28th, 2008, President Barack Obama becomes the Democratic nominee for the presidency, yet another America. So America keeps changing, keeps growing. The result is, last year, we saw President Barack Obama run the last lap of a 54-year race. He didn't cause the race, he's a result of the race, but ran, as any great trackster does, a fast, an amazingly fast last lap. For that 54 decision was the beginning of that race, a little girl trying to go to school in his mother's home state of Kansas. Then, of course, the Dr. King period of removing the public accommodations barriers and the right to vote barriers. And then a very contentious season of democratizing our democracy. For lest we forget, blacks could not vote in the South, but white women couldn't serve on juries in many states in the South. And farmers who couldn't pay poll taxes couldn't vote. Many in debt could not vote. Voting was on Tuesday to make voting less accessible. But 1970, 18-year-olds got the right to vote. We kept broadening the tent. But 1974, we got something called college residence. You can vote where you attend school and not have to go home to vote or vote absentee. So last year in Iowa, the president ran, whole dormitories could become precincts because they had the right to vote where they attend school. Then by 75, bilingual, vote in your first language. Broaden the tent more. When I ran in 84 and 88, we lowered the threshold for who could be a delegate and got something called proportional representation as opposed to winner take all. The result is, in the 2008 campaign, Hillary Clinton, the very able, distinguished Secretary of State, who I appreciate and admire so much, in that heated contest, she won Texas, California, Ohio, Pennsylvania by a narrow margin. But she didn't get all the delegates. She only got her share of them. In that process, President Barack Obama ultimately won the race. Now, of course, he is president. She is Secretary of State. And they're partners. And we're the better for it. Because they share so much of a common worldview. Both of them have a sense the world must be seen through a door and not through a keyhole. For too long, we had leadership that saw the world through a keyhole and only on our own terms. The reality is, in the real world order, half of all human beings are Asian, half of them are Chinese. 1/8 of the Africans, the human race is African, 1/4 is Nigerian. There are 1 billion people in India, twice more than the U.S. and Russian republics combined. In our hemisphere, English is a minority language. Spanish is the majority language. Most people in the real world, not limited anymore by oceans and mountains and language, linked by computers, are yellow, brown, black, non-Christian, poor, female, young, and don't speak English. In that world, requires a leadership of broad vision and hope. And that world, which was once so divided, east and west, is increasingly divided north and south. Those who live in the surplus and those who live in the deficit. And those in the deficit are fighting back in very different kinds of ways. And a cure to that is not just to kill the mosquito, to clean out the swamp, to in fact feed the hungry, to in fact provide more health care. And one of America's great challenges today, I'm convinced, is that we have not quite adjusted yet to the impact of globalization, in the sense that we've globalized capital, looking for where we can find the best raw material and the cheapest labor. But by globalizing capital without globalizing human rights, workers' rights, women's rights, children's rights, environmental security, you create a great jolt there. So we lost, around 1999, we had 17 million manufacturing jobs. Today it's around 9 million, and we're losing. So in the face of this crisis, we are losing jobs, manufacturing jobs, and small businesses that spin around them, home foreclosures, church foreclosures, student loan defaults, and credit card scams. Too few got too much and protected by law, and too many don't have enough. Now reinforced by a Supreme Court decision last week that empowers those who have to protect themselves by leveraging their power to vote out those who challenge their monopoly capital. In the face of that, and I close, what Roosevelt had to do, which ultimately they must look at anew, he had to go to the heart of the matter, monopoly capital. He had to restructure banks, not refortify them. Had to separate securities from banking. If bankers have a trust between lending and trading, they'll choose trading over lending every time. That's what is happening in our country today. And they are trading, but they're not lending, even though they've been bailed out by billions of interest-free money. And then he also had to have a strong FDIC, Federal Department of Insurance. He had to have a strong congressional oversight, which we have lost in the intervening years. He had to put more on home foreclosures. You can't pay your house note if you don't have a job. And he had to provide jobs through workers working WPA or CCC camp. And so right now we've done a kind of top-down bailout. And the banks as institutions have not been inclined to go beyond their own narrow interests or their own legal right of maximizing profit, but not in the interest of those who are facing the hemorrhaging at the bottom of our economy, the loss of the jobs and the houses and the churches and the student loans. And so while it is midday or high noon in our politics, and that's a good thing, it's midnight in our economy. Because we're so connected, it's midnight in our global economy. We must figure out some creative ways to bring about that shared security, to make all of us better, make all of us better off. The leadership we seek must be driven by those of hope and change. The cynics win elections, they don't win, they don't make change. The wall came down in Berlin because somebody believed and would not give up believing and hoping. Cynics never brought that wall down. The walls in South Africa came down because the believers and those of hope and sacrifice never gave up. The walls in America came down, seemingly impossible walls, and yet because of belief and hope and faith, those walls came down. Today, that faith, that hope, that change, whether we apply it to Haiti or Afghanistan, that hope, that faith must not surrender to cynicism. At the end of the day, suffering breeds character. Character breeds faith. In the end, faith will not disappoint. Thank you very much.